it's a very great pleasure for me to introduce Leslie Morris. I had the pleasure of knowing and working with since the mid-1980s, when she was the curator of history and bibliography at the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia. At that point, it was clear to me that Leslie was a priceless librarian and library administrator to work with, and I have only become more convinced of that over the years as we have continued to work together and as I've continued to learn from her. Leslie Morris is now the Gore Vidal Curator of Modern Books and Manuscripts at the Houghton Library at Harvard University. And through this position, she is certainly one of the most important curators of modern literature in the United States, if not worldwide. With several important bibliographic or literary associations and serves as trustee of the Emerson Memorial Association and director of the Keats Shelley Association of America. While she's also served on the Dickinson Museum Board of Governors for several years, her most substantial contribution to Dickinson studies, and it is indeed hugely substantial, is in directing the extraordinarily useful and elegant Emily Dickinson Archive, about which she'll speak today. Before turning things over to her, however, I also want to mention that Leslie produced the beautiful edition of Dickinson's Herbarium that many of you may know that came in 2006. And she's also published a lovely edition of Audubon's early drawings, in addition to publishing many articles and exhibition catalogs. And she is a priceless resource for Dickinson scholars and for those seeking permissions from the Houghton or from Harvard University Press. It goes without saying. Please join me in welcoming Leslie Morris.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. That's a very generous introduction, and I only hope that I can live up to it. So I'm just going to dive. I've been given 20 minutes, and there's really quite a lot covered. So I hope that everyone in this particular audience has used the EDA at edickinson.org at some point or another. But I suspect that not all of you are familiar with its history or have taken the time to read through all of its many informational pages. So I want to spend just a few moments at the beginning with a brief overview of what this resource is. The overarching philosophy of EDA is that the manuscript is at the center of everything. As you know, Dickinson never supervised the transformation of her manuscripts into print, and editors who have attempted to do so have faced significant challenges. Our goal in EDA is to provide a single point of reference for high-resolution images of all surviving autograph manuscripts and eventually, we hope, the letters. EDA is meant to be a site to support and facilitate scholarship by making these unique materials more widely and more easily available. I want to emphasize, however, that EDA is a collaborative project. While it was initiated by Harvard as an internal collaboration between Houghton Library and Harvard University Press, it's a Dickinson project, not a Harvard project. And as you can see from this slide, it took a fairly large team working several years to bring it into reality. And I think you'll recognize on this list of the advisory board in particular that many members of EDIS were involved in its design. The site launched in October of 2013. The initial phase includes only poems. There were practical reasons for this. The Franklin edition of 1998 provided a relatively recent census of these manuscripts. It told us that 19 institutions held poem manuscripts, as well as a number of private collections. Most of the extant poem manuscripts were included in EDA from its launch. to the 8 founding libraries. We're in the process of adding another 5. These are the libraries indicated by the red diamond, bringing the total to 13 of those 19 libraries. I'm still trying to get images from the 6 libraries also listed at the bottom, but I admit that I've let several years go by since last nagging them, so it's really partly my fault, but I will get them eventually. But let's get started with searching and using manuscript images. I apologize for not doing a live demo, but frankly, limitations on the bandwidth at my home made it pretty slow when I tried it, and I do have limited time. So this page, I hope, is familiar to all of you. This is the home screen. And what I've done here is to put in the search box the term death. And that search box will then search the text of the 6 editions included in EDA. The 3 1890 editions, the single hound, and the Johnson and Franklin editions. You can also, in this box, search by Johnson or Franklin number, which I often use myself. So from this search, I get 296 results. Now, the search results are weighted. If the search term occurs in a title or first line, those will appear at the top of the list, with occurrences in the text following. You can click on the title, first line column, and that takes you to the image of that manuscript. You can also, from this screen, search within results. That's the yellow arrow at the top right, or you can filter your results, and those are the 3 boxes at the bottom of this page. Filter will give you a drop-down list of the dates, the recipients, and the editions that occur within your results. So this is really a slightly more efficient way of narrowing your results than simply searching within them. So from that list, I've selected a death blow is a life blow to some. And it takes me to this single image display. Now you'll note that the search results are also now appearing on the left-hand tray. So if this isn't the manuscript that you were looking for, you can just scroll through those results and select another image. You don't need to go back to the previous page. So now I'm pulling out the text tray on the right, and the default text display, if you're in the Franklin edition, as I am here, is to give you a line-by-line transcription of the manuscript that appears in the center of the screen. It will also show you the poetic line if you then uncheck the box that's indicated by the blue arrow. And you can toggle back and forth just to see the difference between the physical line in the manuscript and the poetic line. The box at the top of the screen, or the tray, tells you which editor's transcription you're seeing at the moment. And you can also use that to change which editor's transcription you want to see. It's a drop-down list. If the text has changes or alternative readings, those will also appear in the transcription. This particular poem does not. And you can choose to display them or to hide them by also checking the box that's to the left of the blue arrow. Also note that at the bottom of the text tray, you're given related works, and that shows you that there are 2 other manuscripts for this poem at Amherst and Boston Public Library, and you can change the manuscript displayed in the center by clicking on one of those alternatives. So I'm going to switch to the BPL manuscript. So I'm particularly intrigued by the lost text near the top of this page. So I want to maximize the manuscript view. So I've closed both the search results and the text trays. You can enlarge the image by using the scroll wheel on your mouse, and you can move the image around by holding down the left mouse button and moving your mouse. Or you can choose the full screen view, which is indicated by the yellow arrow, which indicates those 4 buttons at the upper left of the screen here. But you only see those buttons when you're actually moving your mouse around on the screen. They're not persistent. But this gives you 2 different ways where you can zoom in to the manuscript image and really look at the details. You can really, in some instances, see the embossed marks on the page and almost the texture of the page. Now, there are some functions of EDA that are linked to a personal account, and the yellow arrow pointing to the upper right shows you where you can either create an account, sign up, or sign in if you already have an existing account. If you have an account, you can create reading lists, and you can also make notes that are associated with a particular image. An account requires only an email address. And that's really so that if you forget your password, we can send you reset instructions. We do not keep a list of email addresses and passwords, so you cannot contact us to ask what your password is. You just need to request a password reset. Once you are signed in, then the My Notes tab at the bottom of the screen becomes active. And that's where the blue arrow is pointing. And you can see that there's a box there where you can input your notes, and always remember to press save in order to save those notes to your account. So if you're teaching a class on Dickinson and you want all of your students to have access to the same reading list of manuscript poems and to see each other's notes, all you need to do is give them all the same email address and password to use. And I'll point out here, it doesn't need to be a real email address. You can make it up. But if you do that, obviously we're unable to send you anything to reset your password. So you do need to keep that password secure. And this is just a view of some of the notes and reading lists that I created in my account. The Add to Reading List option persists at the top of the text tray. And at the bottom, you'll see that there's an option to create a new list. And the first lines that you see on both the notes and the reading list will take you immediately back to that manuscript image. Could I just ask that whoever is pouring themselves a drink mute, because I'm finding it quite distracting.
Tom, could you please mute yourself? Tom Daly, could you please mute yourself? Yes.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. Now, all of the images in EDA can be downloaded. You do this from the bottom tray in About This Image tab. And I apologize, it's a little difficult to find and not intuitive. You have to scroll down to the very bottom of the information about the image. When you do download the image, you will actually get 2 files, one with the image and one with the metadata or the credit line for the image. Now, in preparing for this presentation, I noticed that it's not working at the moment, so don't try it right now. We are working to get it fixed. So those are really the basics of searching and using texts and images. but there are other ways of looking at manuscripts within EDA. So here I'm going to browse images, that option is where the yellow arrow is pointing at the top left. If you choose browse by image, you will get the screen shown, which lists each of the repositories who have contributed images. And if you click on that plus sign, you'll get a list of their images and manuscript numbers in EDA. The order in which these manuscripts display is really controlled by the metadata that each of those institutions provided. So for Houghton Library, for example, if you click on the plus, you'll get all of our manuscripts in our call number order. Now, you can also choose to browse the images by work. And if you choose that, this is the screen that you get, which produces the entire database with a default sort by title or first line, as here. But you can change that sort, and that's where the yellow arrows are pointing, by toggling the up and down arrows on the screen. So next, there are resources beyond images in EDA that I want to focus on because really these are often overlooked by people who just come and search for a particular poem. And the most popular of these every year, I admit, is the Lexicon. So Cynthia Hallam at Brigham Young University and creator of Emily Dickinson Lexicon very kindly allowed EDA to incorporate it within the data. The Lexicon is a compilation of all of the words, about 9,000, that occur in the Johnson and Franklin editions of the poems. This page will also take you as links to the digital versions of the Family's Dictionary, the Webster's 1844 dictionary, that's held in the Dickinson collection at the Houghton Library, and those links are pointed to by that yellow arrow. So I wanted to show for comparative purposes the entry in the Webster's Dictionary on the left, the EDL definition at the top right, and its use in a poem, because I think this makes very clear visually the difference between the definition in the Webster's, which we know was in the Dickinson Library, and EDL, Emily Dickinson's Lexicon, which is a scholarly construct using dictionaries of the era to try to come up with definitions that Dickinson would have been familiar with. So it's really two different scholarly resources here. Now, I very strongly encourage you to explore all of the pages under the About tab that persists on all of the pages, which contain quite a lot of useful information and resources for your own research and for teaching. And as you can see on this screenshot here, we've tried to gather together all of the print appearances during Dickinson's lifetime so that you can look at the Springfield Republican version of the poem. We haven't managed to get all of them, so please do, if you have an image or know where one of those newspapers survives, I'd love to complete the set of those print appearances. I also want to direct attention in particular to the FAQs, which were developed after many, many long meetings by the distinguished scholars on EDA's advisory board. These are the most frequently asked questions about Dickinson and her manuscripts, very clearly and concisely worded, and definitely worth a browse. Now, I just want to use a very few minutes, which it looks like I have, to summarize some usage statistics about EDA over the last year. So my first question about this year was there a COVID effect? And yes, there was, and it's quite clear on this graph, which compares the last two fiscal years. And you can see that indeed there was a peak beginning to develop in April and then peaked in May and is now declining. Otherwise, it was pretty much a usual year. On this next slide, you'll see a comparison of usage statistics over the past 4 years. And you'll see that that COVID effect, while it was intense for a short period of time, actually didn't significantly affect the overall usage statistics, which are actually slightly down for the fiscal year. So I'm not sure why that is. But over the years since launch, the numbers have been fairly steady. There are consistently over 4 million page views each year. And when people are on the site, they do tend to stay a long time and look at a relatively large number of pages. There are certainly a number of power users of EDA. And you'll see there that there are some people who have had more than 400 separate sessions over the past year. I definitely consider those power users. So what pages within EDA are used? The top used pages are those on the left. No surprise there. Specific poems rarely make it into the top 10. There are just too many poems that people are looking at. But this year, because I Could Not Stop for Death actually did make the top 10, it was at number 8, by adding together both the Franklin and the Johnson transcriptions of that poem. That's an incredible number of hits for a single poem. I've never seen that in another year, and it's quite exceptional. So I wonder if anyone can tell me, did you assign this as a class assignment to compare the two versions? I'm really curious about why it made the top 10. I also want to note that the poem I Felt a Funeral in My Brain, which actually displays in EDA as no image available, actually did have an image there. It was just not showing. And this is one of the mistakes within the archive that will be corrected in the upcoming update. And again, I do encourage you, if you find something like that, please do let us know, because there are still mistakes. It's a big database, and we haven't been able to correct everything. So I just want to conclude by saying thank you so much to everyone who uses EDA. It helps me make a strong argument every year as to why I should be spending my time in trying to maintain this resource. And again, I encourage you to use the contact link on the website if you notice typos, if you find pages in the wrong order, or any other issues. We do make updates, not immediately, but I do record everything, and it will improve over time. So thank you very much. So I'm more than happy to take questions. I know we're kind of tight on time, and I, for one, don't want to miss Marta's presentation that follows.
We do have a good 10 minutes, so please raise your hand if you would like to participate. And Dan, maybe you can also help me by people with hands raised. At the moment, I don't see any hands among
there's Nancy Pridgeon may have a question, or was she
right.
just clapping? No, that was a yellow hand.
Yeah, okay.
No, I don't.
I have a question.
Yes, Ellen?
I have a question, Leslie, and that's like, what are people looking for generally? I mean, can you describe some of the different scholarly projects or the reasons why people want to look at the manuscripts in your view?
Well, of course, the bad thing about digital databases is that you really have no idea. You don't know who these people are. You can't ask them questions about what they're using. And that's why I do really rely on feedback that I get by attending EDIS or just emailing or chatting with scholars who happen to come to Houghton. I suspect that when Chris was preparing her edition of Emily Dickinson's manuscripts, that she was a fairly heavy user of EDA. I was thrilled to see that EDA was a resource for Julie's game that she was writing during lockdown. I really don't know unless someone tells me what they're using it for. I do know if people are using it on social media, but that's such a very small proportion of uses of images from EDA.
Martha Nell, you have a question? You need to unmute. Martha.
It's really just a comment, Leslie. Thank you so much, by the way. And I use the EDA a lot, but as do my classes. But I don't know if you've had a chance to look at chat, but people are saying what I immediately guessed about Because I Could Not Stop for Death. It's featured in the first episode of the Apple TV Dickinson.
Ah, okay.
And it's very prominently featured. And it comes back in a later episode too. So I don't know if that explains it.
Thank you. Marianne, you had a question?
We don't get that service.
It's more about Apple TV. I was just curious if you had collaborated with them at all on that. Oh, and if
well, yes, I think both Jane and I fielded a lot of questions. I have to say I was really impressed by the detail that their set designers were concerned about creating. And I have to say I don't have Apple TV and I haven't watched the series yet. But, you know, they asked to reproduce the family portraits. They asked questions about the chairs. So yes, they were in touch. I think probably they consulted with the museum slightly more because we really have only a very small subset of Dickinson furniture and paintings. So,
Adalberto, you have a question?
First of all, I just want to say thank you for your presentation and thanks for this wonderful archive. For me, as I'm translating the Dickinson for the last 6 years, I've been using it every day. So it's a wonderful tool. Yeah, but I'm just curious about something that happened last year. I was presenting in Moscow during a conference, and I needed the archive, and I couldn't have access. Do you know if is there any?
No. I mean, it's we don't put any. There's no wall around it. I mean, it's meant to be open access. So that sounds more like a browser or internet problem than an archive problem itself.
Thank you.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but because I'm hosting the next section as well, and Marta is eagerly waiting for me to open up the Zoom, I have to blow the whistle on this one. But let's clap for one way or another for Leslie one more time. This was a great demonstration.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie.
And please, yeah, I mean, just get in touch with me individually.